Strong Sports channel. I'm going to cover a few things on how to get BlackArch Linux working from outside of the box, installing it through VMware, configuring network interfaces, and also getting VMware tools actually installed. BlackArch Linux is different from other Linux distributions in regards to requiring a lot of manual configuration coming strictly out of the box. Some other distros such as Kali Linux, ParaOS, Backbox, BudTrack, the list goes on. Pretty much if you install them in a virtual machine using such as a VMware or perhaps Oracle VirtualBox, you generally don't have too much any issues with requiring any additional configuration. But BlackArch Linux is a little bit different. So a BlackArch is three different stages where one would have to complete. First, the initial installation phase. Second stage is the depending on what order you want, but the second stage could be VMware tools installation, or it could be the network interfaces configuration. So depending on what order, I particularly like to go installation, VMware tools, and then the last phase is the actual interface configuration, simply because the preference is to snapshot your image at every other so often. So you snapshot when the image is installed, snapshot again when VMware Tools is installed and functioning, and then snapshot again when the interfaces are configured. So if you come across a break or unintended interruption, you can snapshot back to revert image and you don't have to redo anything. And I recommend to snapshot after the initial installation simply because it may require an hour and a half to 2 hours just for BlackArch Linux to install depending on your network speed. So on the screen there's the usual login page that prompts open when BlackArch is fired up. The initial credential when running BlackArch Linux is user root, password is BlackArch. But during installation phase, it will ask you if you want to create a normal user. If you decide, and I recommend to create a normal user, then you can put in your username and also the password that you have chosen basically for the user account. And BlackArch Linux will store your credentials. So, installation steps. I have used VMware for most of my virtual machines, but I also have dabbled with Oracle VirtualBox just to compare the features and functionalities between distros. And this particular slide, there's a list of bullet points. Each bullet point is particularly a step that must be taken just to finally start the install. So with BlackArch Linux, everything, practically 95 to 100%, is executed via terminal. BlackArch does not have a GUI like other distros such as ParaOS, Kali Linux. It does not have a GUI in regards to a desktop. So everything is pretty much through the terminal. So after you execute BlackArch -install, the second option will arise and it will ask you to set your basically your normal features such as hostname, locale, key map, because it wants to determine your preferences in regards to time zone and locale. Also, it will bring up your available interfaces if you are configuring BlackArch Linux on a non-virtual way, as if you're installing BlackArch Linux on an actual host system, then your interface is most likely that will come up will actually include a wireless interface if it can recognize the wireless NIC. I will say that when I attempted to install BlackArch Linux on an older computer, it did not recognize my wireless NIC. But when I ran a test booting the live image on my Asus computer, it recognized my wireless NIC. So just know, if you are working with a much older computer, they may perhaps have an older NIC, BlackArch Linux may not recognize it. So if you're installing BlackArch Linux on an older computer, the preferred way, if you definitely are pursuing that internet access, of course, for testing, is to configure the wire interface. So with installing BlackArch Linux using VMware, you want to set the hard drive to SDA. You want to choose those as your label type. There are three partitions you want to set up: root, boot, and swap. The bootable partition should be set around 500 megabytes just for primary purposes. The second one is 512 meg. That's the primary, that's the swap partition. So in the menu, you will click on go to type and pick Linux and swap Solaris. The remaining partition can pretty much have the rest of the available space that's part of your overall size. So you will press enter twice. You will save the settings by going to right and pressing enter and then quit. Then it will ask you to eventually define the partitions that you just set up. So the boot partition will be the /dev /SDA1. X4 is the file system. Root partition is dev SDA3 xt4, and swap is dev SDA2. You must have the partitions correct, or you may have a problem too with installation. So you may want to set aside perhaps an hour and a half for installation. Could be less, could be longer, but generally speaking, set aside at least 90 minutes for the install. Now, with installing using the live ISO image, it would take a little less time than trying to use the net install option that BlackArch Linux has. The net install is small. It's perhaps 450 megabytes, only because it does not contain all of the packages that you would need. So if you are installing BlackArch Linux using that install, you will need a considerable amount of time to install, because you need to bring down all of the packages that are available that need to complete the functionality of the distro. So a preferred way is to use the actual ISO itself, which is around 14 to 15 gigs. It's basically a trade-off on time, where you can take time to download the ISO and then have a quicker install later, or apply the net install first and have a much longer time install. So the trade-off is the time. VMware tools. I comprised this list because I wanted to consolidate all of these steps that need to take place in order to install VMware tools on the BlackArch Linux distro. On other distros such as Kali Linux, is pretty much, it is quite an easier process to install VMware tools on Kali Linux. You can do multiple ways on a distro simply because there's a desktop, and there are ways of navigating the file system that are much easier, or I say user friendly, than using BlackArch Linux. But hey, there's a way to get around it. So with BlackArch Linux, there are quite a few things that should be done before you even execute the installation path. One, VMware Tools does not like when Open VM Tools is on the system. So you may have to remove the VMware Tools package. So the command is remove /user/bin vmtools sd. Just remove the package out of the system. If you do not do this and you run VMware Tools, it will run the script, and then about halfway in, it will recognize that VM Tools is available. It will say it must abort the installation script, remove VM Tools SD, and then rerun the installation script. The problem with rerunning the script is now you have half of a package that's available, but the other half is not. So you run the risk with almost confusing the system there. So just avoid it altogether by removing VM2SD. Mount VMware Tools installation so you can proceed with making the directory and mounting the CD-ROM path. Follow up with mounting the CD-ROM path, and there's a command you should enter. I prefer to enter this command before you proceed any way further. With BlackArch Linux, when you install the distro, it does not have the init.d directories in the file system. It does not exist. So to perhaps help VMware tools and be ahead of the installation process, just run the command 4x in parentheses 0.6 and go on. Just run the entire command. What that command does, it creates 6 different directories that are needed for VMware tools. So you're forcing the system to make these directories, so when you run the VMware Tools installation script, it can recognize these directories. If you don't run the command, the script will run, but then it would say cannot find the init.d directories. So just bypass that particular step by creating them early. Change your file path to temp. You will want to basically unzip the VMware Tools package using tar. Change the directory to VMware Tools distrit, and of course running the installation script, which is written in Perl. So once the script is run, it will ask you a number of options and requests. Most of them have a default yes, so just choose the default suggestions for all of the questions. There are perhaps 3 that may say no, so just choose no when it says no and choose yes when it says yes. Now after running the script, an error may pop up and it may say, well, we cannot find the VMware tools.service. So VMware will actually abort the final step of the installation because it simply just can't find the VMware tools.service file. But don't worry, there's a way to get around this. So type nano, which is going to bring up the file that should be edited. After the editor opens, basically type the lines that are on the screen. There are a space that between certain lines. So unit description equals VMware tools daemon. It can remind you of coding in Python or Bash when there's a comment at the very top, which is often overlooked. But the comments generally let the system know to open that line. The comments are mostly known for us. They are just information for us to know what the script is going to do. But here the description lets the system know, hey, it's a VMware Tools service script here. So leave a space, follow it with the exec start, and write and type the command out in with start. Follow up with the same command but end with stop. Set the timeout set to 0. Type remain after exit equal yes. Leave a space, enter, type install. Right afterwards, type wanted by equals multi-user.target. Save your changes by basically Control O. Control O will put the cursor on right. Enter and then quit. And here is an example of how it looks via the terminal. So basically the same file that I just showed in the previous slide, you now can see how it looks in the terminal. So as everything is typed out with timeout set equals 0, it's a space and install wanted by multi-head user.target. So this is basically a visual example of what was just previously shown. After the file is edited, you now want to go to the terminal and type systemctl start VMware tools.service, which basically tells the image to start the service. Now you want to enable the service. So now it's fully functioning. And the screen should expand. It should expand after the service is enabled. And VMware should be fully functioning. I recommend to take a snapshot of the image. Back up this image. Back it up. Perhaps take 2 snapshots. But definitely create a backup of the image and also reboot just to test and see if the system recorded your input. Now it should have. When after typing enable, a screen should pop up and it would say something as active. So the service should now be recognized as an active service. So at this point, VMware Tools is installed and ready. Now for the last spot, the interfaces. As previously mentioned, BlackArch Linux does not come out of the box with interfaces that are recognized if you work in a virtual image. In other cases where you're not working in a virtual image, but you're actually installing a host OS on a more modern computer, your wireless NIC should be recognized. But in case your interfaces are not recognized, you'll want to type IP link just to show the interfaces that are at least available, but they're not enabled. So IP link will let you know at least the name of the interface that you want to enable. By default, the interface name through BlackArch Linux will be either O. That's the default interface name. You want to replace the interface name with the assigned interface name that pops up when you see IP link. So make a note on your interface name because you will need it for every command in order to configure your interface. So you want to type sudo cp /etc/netctl /examples /ethernet-static. And notice, for the sake of the slide, you see either O on every single command, but you want to replace it with yours. And follow each command by copying the file with your assigned interface name. What you basically are doing is you are changing the way the system recognizes the static. So Ethernet static means it's not going to change. So you pulling from that rule first and then following up with changing your interface name with every single command that it needs to recognize. So when you go to sudo nano, by default you will see either there. Change the interface name to the one that you actually have. Once you change the interface name, you write your changes, then you quit. Type the sudo netctl, enable your assigned interface name. Very similar to how VMware Tools was enabled. Then you follow up with start. Now the final 2 pieces of command are using the systemctl. And just for an example purpose, it says dhcpcd at etho.service. But of course you would replace etho with your interface name. And then you want to actually start the service. and that basically enables your interface. So just to test it, just ping google.com, and if successful, you will see bytes that come back from pinging google.com, which basically lets you know you can have a connection that access the internet. So as proof of my internet access, you can see in the very bottom, I have CNN breaking news. I have Mozilla Firefox that I have running in BlackArch Linux, and just as an example of having ready internet, the same steps that I have showed you are the same steps that I had to follow. So I hope this is a great help. This took quite a few tinkering and figuring around, and I wanted to put this all in one location slash video. So the strong exploits. Subscribe to the channel. Look at my previous videos that I have on other cool tools such as Windows Commando VM or the Joker framework. I think that's most a sleeper. A lot of many still sleeping on. Speaking of Joker framework is actually present. It actually comes installed with BlackArch Linux. So, hey, so if you want to get your hands a little bit dirty with Joker framework, BlackArch Linux is an option for you where you don't have to manually install it like I did with Joker framework. I did Docker to pull the container down, and I have it on a Debian distribution. But BlackArch Linux has Joker ready, so just to give you a heads up on it. The strong exploits.